I'm here with Russell Marsan today. We are talking about all things 1031 exchange. This is a strategy that a lot of my real estate investors use. So we're going to get into a lot of the questions that some of my clients had asked me to ask him. So thank you for being here. I'm very excited to have you. We have so much to cover today.
We have a lot.
Yeah. So why don't you start just by telling us what is the basic premise of a 1031 exchange? Why do we do this?
Great question. Yeah, the 1031 is actually the greatest wealth building tool in the entire Internal Revenue Code. What it does is it allows a real estate investor to reposition their real estate assets throughout the course of their entire life without having to pay tax. Because as somebody grows in life, their financial objectives change.
Right.
And as you grow in life and your objectives change, the 1031 allows you to pivot, right, to that different type of real estate that better suits whatever your current financial objectives are. Because investors, when they start investing, appreciation, they're trying to build wealth. They don't have any money, they're trying to build it. So they buy properties that are geared towards appreciation, like single family, right? Later on in life, maybe they own a bunch of single family rental properties. They've done really well. They've built a lot of equity, a lot of wealth. Well, now it's time to retire. So now they don't want appreciation as much anymore. Now they want cash flow. And then later on in life, they want to go passive. They don't want the headaches of owning real estate. So they want to go passive, right?
Yes.
Those are all different kinds of objectives.
Yeah.
The 1031 allows, as one type of property becomes obsolete, it allows you to pivot to the next type without having to pay taxes.
What are capital gains taxes looking like if you don't use a 1031 exchange?
Yeah, and this is a big one because I talk to a lot of people that say, hey, I'm not going to do an exchange because I've calculated the tax in my own mind and it's not that much. Like, yeah, there's some red flags in that statement. One is I calculated it in my own mind, right? If you told me you talked to Russell,
I'm not doing my own tax.
No, don't calculate in your own mind. If your CPA tells you, no, I'm not going to pay any taxes, great. If I tell you you're not going to pay any taxes, great. But most people have a great misconception that capital gains is only like 15%, and that's all they're going to pay if they sell it. It's just 15%. I get that a lot. It's physically impossible in any state, actually. Even if you live in a state that doesn't have state tax, there's nobody that can sell an investment property and only pay 15%. The taxes in California, we're the heaviest tax state in the country. And so the average tax in California is about 35%. It can be over 40% because there's different layers of taxation, right? There's capital gain, which is based on the appreciation of an asset. That's 15 to 20% to the feds. And then the state of California, if you have gain, appreciation, that's just income to them. So it's whatever your income tax bracket is in California. So that's 10 to 13%, somewhere in that neighborhood. And there's depreciation recapture, right? Most people don't know about that.
Let's forget about that one.
Forget about that. You take that depreciation the entire time you own it, which is a fantastic benefit. But then when you sell it, you're recaptured. So, if you've taken $15,000 of depreciation a year for 10 years, you've taken $150,000 of depreciation. That means you've actually lowered your cost basis by that amount of money. So the gain is the appreciation. The depreciation is also taxed, but it's taxed at a higher rate. That's just a 25% flat rate to the feds, no matter what your income tax rate is.
25% on the depreciation.
Depreciation recapture. That's just to the feds. The state doesn't care if it's appreciation or depreciation. It's all just taxable income to the state. So, on average, that's going to be about 35% for the depreciation recapture.
Wow, that's a lot.
And then the last tax is the net investment income tax, which is more commonly known as the affordable healthcare tax, and that's 3.8%. So when you lump them all together, 35% is kind of an average in California. It can be over 40%. That's a lot.
That's insane.
So you just want to make sure that you talk to your CPA and you know what your tax rate's going to be if you're not going to do an exchange, right? If you do an exchange, then you can defer that tax. But now a lot of people say, oh, I'm just deferring the tax, right?
You're going to have to pay it eventually.
Going to pay it eventually because we all have been told that two things in life are inevitable. What are those two things?
Death and taxes.
Death and taxes. We didn't rehearse that. In fact, all of you out there in your mind were saying the same thing, right? You're saying death and taxes. We've been lied to. Only one of those is actually inevitable.
Okay.
We don't have the death thing figured out, but we do have the tax thing figured out. Current estate tax law is incredibly favorable, right? Right now, the floor on estate tax is $12.9 million. That means if you're single and your estate's below 12.9, no estate tax. If you're married, double that amount, almost $26 million, no estate tax, and your IRS going to step up in basis. The step up in basis is the super cool part. Let's say I bought a property in Auburn 60 years ago for $100,000. And when I pass away, it's worth $2 million.
Right.
So let's say I pass away yesterday. My kids go on title of the property today. Their basis is stepped up to the $2 million, the fair market value as of the date of my passing. So they can sell it immediately and pay no tax.
Wow.
Right. So the taxes are forgiven to the estate process. So that's why we say, don't cash out of your real estate.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Don't cash out of your real estate. Instead, just keep exchanging throughout your course of your entire life. Keep that money working for you and growing.
Right.
Because then when you pass away, your heirs will get that step up basis and all those taxes will be forgiven.
So tell me about the timelines involved with 1031 exchanges. Can I just sell something in the spring when the market's hot, and then by maybe midwinter when nobody's buying?
Oh, yeah, there's actually very rigid timelines in the 1031. The IRS is very strict about it. You have 45 days to identify and 180 days to close. Both of those time periods begin when the property you're selling, we call it the relinquished property, closes. Now we have to set up the exchange prior to closing. Right? You can't call me after closing and say, Russell, ready to do an exchange. We've got our check right here. Yeah, that's a fully taxable sale. It only takes a day to set up the exchange. We just have to have it in place before you close. And then once it closes though, okay, now you got 45 days to identify. That's a short time period.
It is.
It sounds long, but it's not. That 45-day identification period is the number one killer of 1031s.
Yeah.
Because what people do is they'll wait. Right? They wait until they've sold. I don't want to write a contingent offer. I want to wait till my property's closed before I start writing offers. That's not a good strategy. You should try to get into contract on a replacement property prior to closing escrow on the relinquished property.
Right.
Try to close them a couple weeks apart. Right? You just want to make sure, try to close your exchange before day 45. And the reason why I say it is because prior to midnight on day 45, you can change your identification all you want. Mm-hmm. You can add, revoke all you want. But as soon as midnight strikes on day 45, you can only close on something you've identified after that day. You can't substitute new properties, no matter what's happened to your properties.
So tell me, how much can you reinvest when you do a 1031 exchange? Do you have to put all of your gain into your next property?
Yeah, so actually 3 things have to be equal or greater, because a lot of people start out the conversation with me. They're like, hey, Russell, I bought it for this much. I owe this much. I put this much into it. And I'm like, you know what? We can just slow down a little bit there, because none of that really matters for a 1031 purpose. Like, how much do you have to reinvest for? There's 3 things that actually have to be equal or greater. And all 3 of these things have to be equal or greater, not just one or the other. First is sales price.
Okay.
So they're selling for $800,000. Great. You need to, technically it's not $800,000. It's a little bit less than that. You do get to subtract those one-time closing costs. Okay. So commissions. Right. Title and escrow fees, transfer tax, our fee, right? Those things come off. So if you sell for $800,000, those costs for $50,000. $750 is the equal or greater mark to defer all tax. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is debt. Debt, just because debt is being paid off on a relinquished property at closing doesn't mean you don't have to buy for that amount again, right? You have to replace the debt. It just kind of makes sense. Right, because if you owe $100,000 on a property, you still have to incur at least $100,000 debt on the replacement. Almost. Okay. And what I mean by that is, so the big picture is you got to buy and sell for equal or greater value. Mm-hmm. That's now how you do that is up to you. Doesn't matter. Yeah, because if you sold, like you said, if you sold for $800,000, you got $100,000 debt. Okay, well, there's only $700,000 of proceeds in the exchange account. Mm-hmm. And you have to buy for $800 again. So how are you going to do that? Mm-hmm. You're going to either take on a loan or you're going to bring in outside cash. Mm-hmm. You can do that, right? So if they have $100,000 of liquid cash sitting on and they want to buy their $800,000 property all free and clear with all cash, perfectly fine. You don't have to get a loan. Okay. But you have to replace that debt either with cash or new debt. Can we revisit the sales price thing? So sure. If I sell for $800,000. I only owe $100 on it. I have $700 in gain in theory. I know not really, but in theory I have $700 in gain. Can I just buy a replacement property though for $700? You can, but you're going to pay tax on the difference. On the $100. Right. Even though it's debt? Yeah, it doesn't matter. So remember, all 3 of these things have to be equal or greater. First is all purchase price. All 3 at the same, not and or. Okay. Debt. And then the last thing that has to be equal or greater is the proceeds. So all of the cash that's coming out has to be reinvested as the down payment. So basically, because the math can be kind of confusing in a 1031, right? Yeah. Here's a way to simplify all the math in a 1031. just make sure that you do two things. You'll never pay tax if these two things happen. Buy and sell for equal or greater value, and don't touch any money. If those two things happen, the math falls into place. They'll never pay a dime in taxes. It's okay, by the way, to buy down, or it's okay to take some money out. It's perfectly fine. Just understand that that's going to be taxable to you.
What makes a property a like-kind exchange?
Great question. This is the number one misconception in all of 1031.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a visual person. So if you tell me something has to be like-kind, then I'm visually thinking, okay, if I sell land, I have to buy land.
Right.
If I sell a house, I got to buy a house, commercial for commercial. It's not the case. All real estate's actually like-kind with all real estate.
Okay.
It's not what a property looks like that makes it like-kind. It's how it's treated. Any property that's treated for business or investment purposes is like-kind. So raw land. Anybody out there watching this video now, if you own a raw piece of land, like 1 to 5 acres, something like that, you probably don't have any income coming off the property. Right? You can't depreciate it because there's no improvements on it, so you don't have that benefit. It's a negative cash flow vehicle, right?
Yeah.
You're paying your property taxes, you're paying to have it maintained, and you're losing money every year.
Yeah.
Right? You can 1031 out of that. Right? You can sell raw land and buy your first rental property. Right?
Okay.
Now you have a rental property. Now you have cash flow coming in, income. Right? Now you have depreciation to help shelter the income. And in a lot of cases, you have a better appreciating asset because maybe the house is going to appreciate. But if you look at the different types of real estate, raw land, single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial, etc., they all kind of have different financial objectives. So as your objectives change, the 1031 allows you to pivot, right, to that type of property that better suits your current financial objectives.
Back to the like-kind. Can you use your 1031 exchange to buy a primary residence?
To qualify for 1031, the intent, right, must be to hold for business or investment purposes, not for personal use. Personal use properties don't qualify 1031. The IRS created my absolute favorite revenue procedure back in 2008. It's revenue procedure 2008-16. I read it every night before I go to bed. It gives me very happy dreams. I'm a tax nerd, I'm sorry. But what that is, it's an actual safe harbor. It shows someone how to buy a personal use property with a 1031 and go through this conversion process. And so what that safe harbor says is you can do an exchange. You can sell your investment properties. So let's say you want to sell 2 of your rental properties or a piece of land. You want to buy your dream home in Tahoe, right? Well, you can do that with a 1031. But so you do the exchange, you buy the property, but for the first 2 years, and this is the time period, for the first 2 years after the exchange, you have to treat the property 2 ways. One is you have to limit your personal use to 2 weeks a year or less, or 10% of the rental history per year, whichever is a greater number. Yeah, so if you rent on like Airbnb for 300 days a year, you could use it for 30 days a year personally, right? And if I'm going there to work on the property, that's not a personal use visit.
So we can use a 1031 exchange to buy a primary property if we use these conversion techniques.
Yeah, and then after the 2 years, you can do whatever you want. You can move into the property as a primary residence. You can treat it as a pure second home or vacation home. You never have to rent again ever after the 2 years.
And you still don't have to pay those taxes.
Don't have to pay the taxes. You eliminate it. Yep. The conversion of it to a personal use does not trigger any kind of tax consequence. It's only when the sale happens, right? When you actually sell it, that'll potentially trigger a tax. So then at that point, it depends on, what was the last use of it, right? Can I 1031 it again, or am I selling it as my primary, or something like that?
I have a primary residence. We've owned it for 12 years. And we now have substantial gains in it. We have over $500,000 gain in this property. What can I do to minimize or defer my taxes on that property? Can I use a 1031 for my primary?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's owned their property that long, they've probably blown past their $250,000 or $500,000. If you've owned and occupied any 2 out of the last 5 years, you get to exclude a lot of gain, right? Either $250,000 if you're single, or $500,000.
2 out of the last 5 years.
2 of the last 5 years, and you can take that exclusion every 2 years, by the way. Right, so it's not a once in a lifetime thing anymore. So that's a super cool thing. But now we see a lot of people that are in excess. So the IRS gave us a gift back in 2005. They actually now allow the combination of that section 1031, the exchange, and section 121, your primary residence, on the same property, if that property qualifies for both section codes. So let's say you've lived in it for 20 years and you have, let's say you bought it for $100,000, you're selling it for $1 million. right? So you have $900,000 of gain in the property, right? $500,000 you can exclude, but that means there's approximately like $400,000 of excess gain. If I don't want to pay taxes on that, then I can move out of the property and treat it like we just talked about that, right? Rent it for 14 days a year, minimize my own personal use in it, do that for 2 years, and then sell it. Well, now, because the last use was qualified business use for 1031, the entire property qualifies for 1031 deferral. But guess what? I've still lived in it for 2 out of 5 years.
Right.
So the entire property still qualifies for my $500,000 exclusion. So at closing, what happens is I sell for $1 million. I get to pluck out my $500,000 of tax-free money. The gain that was attributed to my primary residence portion, right? So, and I got to put that in my pocket. I don't have to reinvest that in real estate. I can do whatever I want with that money. Now, the remaining $500,000 is my equal or greater per. I need to reinvest that into some kind of, investment property. So instead of paying taxes on $400,000, which might have been $150,000 or so, now I've put $500,000 in my pocket, and I've taken $500,000 and invested into an income property that's going to provide me income for the rest of my life.
Now, is a 1031 exchange, is that a California tax rule, or that's a federal tax rule,
It is,
right?
yeah.
So can you take your 1031 out of state?
Yeah.
Where properties might not be so expensive.
In California, there's this thing going on called an exodus.
Oh, I have no idea. No,
Everybody's heard about it.
Come to California.
Yes. I have been seeing it in my industry for about 9 years. And it's happening for sure. A lot of people are leaving the state for various reasons. Right. But what I see is a lot of people leaving the state personally. And what I mean by that is, their kids moved to Alabama. Right. So they sold their primary residence here, and they bought a primary residence and moved to Alabama. Right. They still own investment properties here, like all their rental properties. And my question is, why?
Yeah.
Right. Why are you managing from 2,500 miles away?
Right.
1031 is federal.
Yeah.
You can sell here in California. Buy anywhere else in the United States. You will defer federal and state tax. California recognizes the 1031, so you won't have to pay California or the feds. You can reposition that money into anywhere else in the United States.
Yeah. Right?
So, and the math works out 100% of the time, right? You can sell one property in Auburn, and with that money, you could buy like probably half of Alabama. You can also, so if anybody's thinking about retiring, right, to another primary residence 2 years from now, they're going to be relocating in a primary, or if they've thought about buying a second home or vacation home anywhere in the United States, right? You can do that with a 1031.
I've got real estate investors, that have been in California for a long time, or wherever. They are sick of dealing with their rentals. They're ready to just basically retire from the whole landlord thing. It's exhausting. This is definitely the case for my parents. They were over it and just wanted to get out of all the rentals. What is a good exit strategy so that you aren't having to pay all of that deferred tax down the road?
Because as we get older, as we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, as we get older, objectives change, right? You built wealth. A lot of people that invest in real estate, the first time they invest in something is single family, right? Because that's affordable. And and you're young, you're in your 20s or 30s, you buy your first fixer, right? After a couple of years, you have some sweat equity in the property, maybe a little positive cash flow coming off it. So you're like, hey, this is cool. Let's do it again. So eventually they buy another one and another one and another one. What a wonderful way to build long-term wealth.
Right.
Seriously, to buy and hold single family. The primary financial objective of single family asset class in real estate is appreciation, not cash flow.
Right.
Everybody gets hooked on this cash flow thing. Single family, the primary financial objective is appreciation. Secondary is cash flow.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you want to build wealth long term, buy and hold single family. You will amass some great wealth long term. But now, if somebody's of retirement age, the baby boomers, right? Baby boomers are only around 20% of the population, but yet they own about over 40% of the real estate, right? Well, you know what? A lot of those people own single family rental properties. And now it's what I call kind of real estate complacent, because it's not, the average person that owns rental properties is not well versed in financial analysis from a real estate standpoint. There's no fault of that to anybody. It's just the way it is, right? Real estate's always been a side hustle,
Yeah.
Right? They're a policeman, they're a teacher, they do something else for a living, they just own investment properties, right? Well, they're in the wrong asset class and they just don't know it. If you're of retirement age, you should not own single-family rental properties. You shouldn't. You're in the wrong asset class.
Yeah.
Because you're in an asset class that's designed for appreciation, not cash flow. So there's also a secondary objective that goes right along with cash flow, and that is passive.
Right.
And that's
passive
where
is beautiful.
passive is good, especially because you get tired of real estate, right? You don't want to deal with tenants, especially in California.
Yeah.
Right? We're not a landlord-friendly state in California.
No.
And I have so many clients, and you'll probably you'll feel the same way about this, and that is that through COVID, so many people lost so much money because they couldn't evict and they couldn't collect.
Oh yeah.
Right? And now after they finally could evict. And now they spent 40 grand on their rental property and they're putting it right back in service. My question is, why are you doing that to yourself?
Right.
You're in the wrong asset class. And so then people ask me, well, what asset class in real estate is designed for cash flow or going passive? And that's commercial, right? Commercial real estate is designed for cash flow.
Yeah.
The primary objective of commercial real estate is cash flow first, appreciation secondarily, right? And then also passive.
And side note, commercial is a whole lot more landlord friendly than residential.
Yeah, and you can even go triple net lease, right? Where you own the property and the tenants pay and do everything. You literally just receive passive cash flow every month. But here's the downside to that, right? I mean, somebody who is of retirement age that owns 5 or 10 rental properties, that's the only asset class they're familiar with. And when you say you're in the wrong asset class, we can double your cash flow and help you go passive if you get into commercial. They're like, whoa. Pump the brakes, right? Scary.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about commercial.
Right.
And that's where DST comes into play. Delaware Statutory Trust. That is a form of replacement property in a 1031 exchange. This DST structure was approved by the IRS in a formal revenue procedure back in 2004, 20 years ago. So we have a lot of history in our world of the DSTs.
And that's interesting because I've never heard of it.
I know, and nobody else has too. It's almost like this little secret.
Yeah.
But basically what it is when you invest into a DST, it's the most passive form of real estate ownership. I'm investing in an institutional grade asset. Institutional grade means it's super expensive. It's $150 million Class A asset somewhere. Like it's an Amazon distribution center or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And all I'm doing is just receiving monthly income every single month. I have no duties or responsibilities. And in fact, I have any kind of expenses as well. There's no cash calls allowed. So if Amazon wants to restripe the parking lot, they can't come to the owners and say, we need 20 grand per head. Literally no maintenance fees. What that means is, because some people will say, well, my rental properties are already passive because I have somebody else managing for me.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really passive because what happens if the roof goes out? Who's cutting that check?
Yeah.
Right? Or the hot water heater or the HVAC, right? You're cutting the check.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not passive. And all those things are guaranteed to happen, right? In a DST, it can't. So it literally is, it feels like you sold your real estate and you were able to put that money tax-free into like a money market account or something because it's that passive.
Okay.
It's not for everybody.
So in that case, Amazon, they would be responsible for the expense of restriping the parking lot?
Yeah, there's an operating expense that's all built into it by the company that's managing the asset.
Gotcha.
So the most common assets you'll see now in that world, when you look into DSTs, are going to be things like climate-controlled mini storage, senior care facilities, student housing. These are the sectors that are doing wonderful and with great outlook in the future. And so they're not, this kind of asset is not for everybody. There's really 3 reasons why people go into them. Most common reason is I just want to retire from active real estate.
Right.
I want passive cash flow, right? The second reason is as a 1031 bailout, right? Through the pandemic and low inventory markets, a lot more exchanges fail because people can't get into contract on something in 45 days. Right. So at the last minute, people are like, you know what? I'm tired of trying to buy a rental property. I'm just going to throw my money into a DST. Because there's always inventory out there in the DST world. It's like a 5-day close. So it's super easy to get into one. And then the last reason why people use it is as a sponge. What I mean by that is you sold for $2 million. You found traditional real estate for 1.7.
Yeah. What
are you going to do with the other 3? I don't want to pay taxes on it. Dump it into a DST.
So tell me about a reverse 1031.
Oh, wow. Okay. If none of you out there have fallen asleep yet, you're about to. so reverse exchange is where you have to buy a property first. right? So, because normally in an exchange, in a delayed exchange, you sell a property first, and then you got 45 days to identify
Right.
and 100 days to go out and buy something else. So the exchanger is never on title to both properties at the same time in a
Okay.
regular delayed exchange, right? In a reverse exchange, you're forced into a situation, or voluntarily choose it, to buy and close on a property first. So you're not just going into contract on a replacement property, you're actually closing on it
Okay.
before you get a chance to close on whatever you're selling, right? Well, in that case, we have to set up the reverse exchange. It's a totally different structure than a delayed exchange. Because remember, in the delayed exchange, you're never on title to both properties at the same time.
Right.
In a reverse exchange, you're buying something first and you haven't sold anything yet.
Yeah.
Can't be on title to both properties at the same time and still be allowed 1031 deferral. The IRS has created this very complex structure where we, the intermediary, we have to park title. We have to physically go on title to one of the properties, right? So we have to create an LLC. So we want to take title to one they're buying. So we create an LLC. It's called an EAT. That acronym is the Exchange Accommodation Title Holder. So we create the EAT. The exchanger's loaning the money to the EAT to buy the property. We give them a note and deed of trust for that.
Okay.
And then the transaction closes under the EAT as the owner. We immediately, when it closes, we immediately triple net lease that property back to the exchanger. So they have total control of that property while we're on title to it. So they can rent it, remodel it, do whatever they want, right?
Yeah.
And now they've got 180 days to get their property sold. So it's kind of the same time frames, just in reverse. And once their relinquished property sells, those funds come back through us in the exchange, and then we pay off that loan they gave us. So they can put that money back wherever they pulled it from.
Got it.
Right, because normally you sell a property first and you've got this big pile of cash to buy something. Right. You don't have that pile of cash in a reverse exchange because you're buying something first.
Does that have to happen within the same tax year?
Not, well, within the tax reporting, right? So in other words, like you can sell a property now because we're nearing the end of the year. 180 days would be way past, January. So you could sell now, and if your exchange doesn't close until next year, you've done what's called tax straddling. You've straddled 2 years.
Yeah.
So you don't want to file your taxes until you've completed your exchange.
Gotcha.
Because if you sold now, and then on January 1st, you're like, I love being an early bird, and I file my taxes before I've closed, I just failed my exchange.
Got it.
So you don't want to do that. Actually, there's a benefit to an exchange failing when it crosses tax years. So if let's say I sell a property in 2024, and then I don't identify something, or I can't close on something, and my exchange fails in 2025. So in other words, the intermediary, now we're releasing funds to them in 2025.
Okay.
So they sold in 2024. They received the money back from us in 2025. They get to tell the IRS, I'm going to opt to use an installment sale. So they don't have to pay taxes on it in 2024. They get an extra year to play with the money and not have to claim that capital gain.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of, they still have to pay the tax. It's just they get a year to play with that money and do whatever they want with it before they actually have to pay the tax.
Tell me about an improvement exchange.
Improvement. So, and this is actually relatively common, right? I'll get this. So if they sold for $1 million, they bought something for $800,000, right? And they said, well, we don't want to buy something else with the $200,000, but we'd like to improve the property that we're buying because they don't want to pay tax on that $200,000 difference, right? The boot.
Yeah.
So it's called an improvement exchange. You can use an exchange to do that and avoid that excess taxation, but it's a structure very similar to the reverse exchange. So what happens is when the replacement property closes, you, the exchanger, are not going on title to it. We are.
Okay.
So we're creating that LLC. We're going to hold title to it because they can't go on title to it until those improvements are done.
Yeah.
And considered real property. Right? So now we're going to act, while we're on title to it, we're going to act as a construction lender. And that extra $200,000 we're holding, we're going to pay the contractor at the request of the exchanger as they're finishing the installments of everything, and then we pay them the draws. And then once they're done, we deed the finished property to the client. Right, so they just go on title to it. And then when they go on title to it, all those improvements have been done.
Yeah.
And they're considered real property, and the money's been spent.
That's fantastic.
It is fantastic, but there's two downsides to it.
Oh, no.
One is 180 days, right? So you still got
you have to work quick.
you got to work
Quick construction.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have this kind of lined up because contractors are backed up, right? You might not be able to supply
very difficult
chains.
to get someone out.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you have your ducks in a row and you're set up for success on it. But it is possible.
What does a qualified intermediary such as yourself, what does this actually cost?
Our industry, and this is going to be surprising to you, it's surprising to everybody, our industry is actually unregulated by the federal government, which is crazy.
No way.
Because
that's
it's
mind-boggling.
It's tough to believe because we hold funds.
Like billions of dollars between all of you.
Yeah, I mean, and it could be your client's entire nest egg. Literally over $1 billion have been lost over the last 20 years by qualified intermediaries for various reasons. Theft, embezzlement, no safeguarding, bankruptcies, all kind of stuff like that. So you do have to be really careful about who you use in the industry.
Wait, so it's not FDIC insured or anything like that?
There is no requirements, no federal requirements for any kind of bonding or insurance. We legally,
That's so
it's
scary.
crazy. We can legally commingle funds.
I can't even commingle $1,000 earnest money.
I know you can. You should come over to our industry. It's more fun.
Sounds like it.
So no insurance required. No, you can commingle funds. You can invest them any way you see fit, right? And because of that, it can be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
We are the largest qualified intermediary in the nation by far. Our parent company is Fidelity National Financial, the largest title insurer in the world, right?
Yeah.
So they make us put into place the highest level of safety and security because we're actually a Fortune 300 company. We voluntarily put in the highest level of safety and security. I mean, definitely for our clients, but not just for our clients, but also for our stockholders, right? To ensure our stock's security and our position as a Fortune 300 company. We have the highest level in the entire industry. We have a $100 million Fidelity bond, $50 million performance guarantee, and $30 million in our emissions. We're also very transparent.
Wow.
We want to make sure our clients know that we're not playing with their money. Right. So when their funds come in, we set up a segregated commercial bank account in only one of the dozen largest, most financially secure banks in the nation. And then we also name the client on the account too, so they know we're not playing with their money, right? They will earn the interest on the funds, not us. Don't get excited about that. This is very liquid, so this is the equivalent of a checking account, right? But never, hey, you'll have enough interest there to have my stake in
a 0.5% is a 0.5%.
Whatever, it's all good. And then, but you asked, your first question was the fees. Right?
Yes.
That's where you brought this from. So we just have a simple flat fee structure. So when you close escrow on the property you're selling, the relinquished property, we are going to collect a $1,000 fee from escrow. We're gonna take that out of the proceeds. And then when you close escrow on whatever you're buying, the replacement side, the fee on that end is just $250. So sell one, buy one.
No matter what.
No matter what. Sell one, buy one, $1,250 is the total cost. That's it. If you buy multiple properties, each property that we're assigning into, right, has got that $250 fee. Okay. So if you
go from like one primary residence that you've converted, all these other tactics that we've talked about, and say you've got $1 million gain and you decide to buy a fourplex. Yep. All good?
Yeah.
Or 4 fees?
No, well, if it's a fourplex, that's one property. But if you bought 4 single-family rental properties, that would be 4 different properties. So each would have a $250 fee. Okay. So what happens is whenever we charge that $250 fee, we're assigning into an escrow. We're assigning into a purchase agreement, right? So each time we have to make those assignments, there's that $250 fee. So if they're buying a couple properties from one seller under one contract, that's still just one. Right, because we're signing to one contract.
Okay. Russell, I have at my house, I have an ADU. I rent it out. I have tenants in it. It really is part of my investment strategy. What can I do when I go to sell that property? Is there a way that I can 1031 my primary?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's what we call a mixed use exchange. And very few people know that because a lot of people in your situation that have a business use, they don't realize they're going to be taxed on it. Right. Because it's their primary residence. Because people will think, well, I'm married and I don't have more than $500,000 of gain and it's my primary, so this entire sale is going to be tax-free to me. That's not true. Because when you sell a property as your primary residence, that's that section 121 we talked about in previous videos, that is an exclusion of gain, right? Okay. If you have a business use in the property, so you claim an in-home office, you rent an ADU, you rent out a bedroom on Airbnb or whatever, right? Those are all business uses. That means you're taking depreciation
Yeah.
Right? When you take depreciation, that is the recapture of that depreciation is not sheltered by your primary residence capital gain exclusion. So there will be a tax, and it's a heavy tax. I mean, typically it's at least 35%, right?
Wow.
So yeah, important question to ask somebody, you know, if they're selling a primary residence is, hey, do you have any business use in this property? In a home office, you know, like I said, renting out a bedroom to Airbnb, ADU, anything like that. If the answer is yes, then the next question is, have you talked to your CPA, right? How much tax are you going to pay? If the CPA comes back and says, we don't depreciate very much, so you're going to pay $2,000 in taxes. Okay, great. You know, don't do an exchange, just pay your tax. If the CPA says, oh, you're going to pay like $60,000 in taxes. Okay, now you have the option, right? You can do a mixed use exchange, right? Part of the property is held for business use. So that part of the property qualifies for 1031 deferral. Part of the property is your primary residence. You live there. That part qualifies for that $500,000 of tax-free money. And it's actually pretty easy to figure out how much I have to allocate towards each side because you've been taking depreciation.
Right.
Depreciation is based on square footage.
Yeah.
So maybe you're depreciating 20% of the property. Okay, well then 20% of the sales price needs to flow through a 1031. 80% of the sales price will come to you completely tax-free under the Section 121 primary residence side, right? Like a duplex, you live in half, you rent out half. Okay, great. Half goes into a 1031, half comes to you tax-free, all that stuff. So it's actually pretty easy to figure out, but it's super important to know before somebody closes, right, that they know what that tax consequence is going to be, so they know they have the option to 1031 the other amount.
But with the 1031 exchange, say I close on a property, I'm thinking about doing a 1031, but I'm just going to leave the money in escrow and see if I can like look around and find something. Do I need to have a 1031 exchange set up prior to closing escrow?
Yeah, the exchange has to be in place prior to closing because what happens is we have to assign into that closing as the seller on behalf of the exchanger because that's going to give escrow instructions to wire funds to us when it closes. Because if they close escrow and we're not in place, right, then even if they don't go in to pick up the check, the fact that they can go in to pick up the check means they have, yeah, because they have constructive, right? It doesn't matter whether you have actual or constructive receipt of funds. If you have any control of funds, you can't do a 1031 exchange. So it has to be in place prior to closing. We can't set up an exchange until they have opened escrow, they've accepted an offer from a buyer, and they've opened escrow. And then we just have to set up sometime during escrow. But in a lot of cases, it's the last minute.
Yeah.
Right, they're at signing, and they're like, we should do an exchange. You're about to sign off.
Yeah.
Okay, give me a call. I will tell you, get up from the table, walk away, go get a Starbucks, and then come back in 20 minutes, and we'll have everything redrawn for you. Before the benefits and burdens of ownership have transferred to the buyer, we have to be in place. And that can be at the last second.
Right. And what is the name of the company that you're with?
So the long name is Investment Property Exchange Services, Inc. Okay. We're more commonly known as IPX or IPX 1031.
Perfect.
Yeah. And I've been doing this for 28 years. So anybody has any questions, you can give me a call. I also teach accredited courses for CPAs and attorneys. So I'm a free resource for everybody's tax and legal advisors too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Russell, for being here. And thank you for answering all these questions from everybody that sent me in messages about your questions about 1031 exchanges. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will get you in touch with Russell. I will also link his information down below so that you can get right in touch with him anytime when you've got your 1031s. I know from here on out, I will definitely not be trusting my 1031s to anybody else because it's way more complicated than I understood. So thank you again, Russell.
Thank you for having me.